Those practices of repurposing materials were connected to emancipation, to learners being able to imagine different futures from those that are imposed to them by broader socio-political structures.
Bonjour, welcome to Wide Walls, a podcast where inspiring educators, researchers, designers, and innovators share their personal journey and their vision for creating better learning experiences for children. My name is Mathieu Penaud. I am a product manager and learning experience designer, and I am passionate about the role of design and technology in education and learning, and the humans behind it. If you find this episode insightful, share it with your friends and colleagues and give us some stars on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you very much for your support and for being part of the conversation. And now, let's welcome our guest. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Renato Russo, an amazing educator, social entrepreneur, and researcher who also happens to be a dear friend of mine. Renato was born and raised near Sao Paulo in Brazil, and he has been involved in numerous initiatives supporting entrepreneurs and educators in local communities and around the world. And we first crossed paths when he joined the master's program in learning, design, and technology at Stanford University. And now Renato is pursuing a PhD at Columbia Teachers College in New York, where he focuses on two main topics: cultural renderings of makerspaces around the world and digital literacy to combat online disinformation. Renato, it's my pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Mathieu. It's a pleasure for me too.
So first, I'd love to learn from you. How do you feel when you reflect on your journey so far, from where you started to where you are now?
Yeah. So studying. Yeah. Well, basically now when I stop and reflect on my kind of learning journey, it's something that I think I learning something that I did almost all my life. I think like in formal, both formal and informal settings, because there's all the K-12 thing, then college, masters, then I'm back to school after a couple of years away doing other different stuff. Always learning, but yeah, learning has been present for me, like as is for many people, but I think intentional learning, with the, like, you go to a place or to a community you start things with the intention to learn. I think this is something that I've been doing for my whole life, I think.
It's something that you try to give back at the same time as an educator.
Oh yeah, I think in a way, as educators, I think we are always trying to teach and learn simultaneously. So I think that's a good point that you brought, like giving, like the thing with giving back or offering something back. I think it's part of the process of learning. So you learn something with the learner, then you help them build new mental structures or ideas. Then you learn with them again, and this kind of iterative back and forth of ideas and concepts. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yes. And if we go back to the start of it, could you tell me more about your childhood? How would you describe it?
Okay, my childhood. Well, I think I had some ideas that my childhood kind of had waves of being in very constrained classrooms and kind of conventional classrooms, like with tests and rote memorization and all this, and being outside doing stuff with friends, playing a lot, finding out like how nature was around the city. I lived in a small town since I was, I think we moved, I was 4 years old, and then I left that small city when I was 19, I think. So the bulk of my childhood and teenage years I spent on this medium, smallish town, like with access to nature. To like there was a river close by that we went to, spend the afternoon and find out about life, basically.
I see. So,
yeah. But then, so I think there was like these uh, two almost extremes, being in classrooms with um, very tight rules, although although they are not like always followed by but there were rules, very strict rules, and being outside and learning things naturally, like driven by interest and discovering things with friends and all that.
That's really interesting. I'm wondering how did that kind of separation between these two different learning environments, how did that inform you as, again, an educator, a researcher?
Right. So I think the social aspect to learning has always been present. So when I was, when I was at that type of schools, that kind of constrain socialization in a way. At that time, I sought different ways to learn with friends. For example, to go outside and play and do stuff more freely. And then throughout the years, when I went to college, for example, I think I was very good at making friends and doing things with them and learn together, uh, like the social skills that my initial training required, like in communication, for example. So in communication, there's a lot of communicating, there's lots of networking and being with people. So I think that was present there too in my initial training as a media person. Then after that, I think I started to create my own stuff and bring those social elements, components to whatever I did. So always trying to bring socialization to practices, to whatever I did. And now in academia is also about being part of communities. I think there's especially this community that we're part of the learning sciences, the community component is super strong. So I think socializing is something that I've been doing since my school years, my K-12 or my first grade years, and then it's present since then.
I love that social component of learning.
Yeah. Yes, and I think well, of course, this is something that schools. I don't think that schools, teachers, educators, administrators in general, they don't want kids to socialize, but it's something that it's hard to control. I think you never know where socialization leads to, so it's scary sometimes for the grown-ups around kids.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I can totally see that. and I'm curious because there's the environment of you at school and you outside of school with friends, and I'm wondering what kind of education do you receive from your parents, because it feels like this is the third big environment.
Yeah, so home. Yeah, of course. I have 3 siblings, 2 sisters, 1 brother. I'm the third of a family. So of a family, 4 kids growing up together. And of course, the socialization again with my brothers and my brother and sisters also had their peaks and valleys, in good and bad things. And my parents, I think they I feel that they try to bring us close um, to their profession, their occupation, which was my mom still has this small factory that they produce uniforms, for clothing. So we were always. I grew up. I always say that I grew up, close to around sewing machines and people, producing things like physical things. And my father had like a small shop in the city, and there is where we work, as clerics or helping do anything, like do stuff during the day, like after school, many years, not only summer. It's something that we constantly did. Go to the bank and make deposits or pay bills for them. This is something that we were always involved in a way in my parents' occupation. Like the four of us, we were always around. It was a way to, I think, it was a way to learn about work in many senses, like learning about working with other people, and also acknowledging the value of other people's work. Many of those people who work with my mother, for example, they were single mothers. They had lots of challenges back home, and of course they brought it to work. So it was also like a way to understand the sort of diversity of backgrounds, of needs, of what people do in their lives. I think this is I think those initial work experiences with my parents, I think they helped me realize many of those things of social life. Yeah, this brings me very vivid memories. Thanks for asking this.
Well, that's nice. I like. I can see that. Yeah, there's some emotions that are coming up and thinking about it.
Yeah.
And do you remember?
This is very formative experiences for me, I think.
I'm sure. And do you remember from that time when you were like a child and going through these experiences, were you projecting your life later on? Like, would you know what you wanted to do?
Well, you're French. You know how kids. I think it's kind of similar, the relationship that you have with soccer, with football. So the thing of being around, football, I think it's something that it's always been present for me. Like, dreaming of playing, or playing for a big team. This type of things. I don't think I connected much my dreams for the future with what I did in my daily life. Now looking back, I can draw all those connections, but I don't think that back then I was super aware of what I could do when I grew up. So my sister was the first one who had a higher education degree in my family. So we didn't talk much about profession back home.
Got it.
That
makes sense.
And it's curious how 3 out of the 4 siblings, so myself and my 2 sisters are educators nowadays. It's interesting to think how we kind of went to different directions, but then converge.
And going back to like your formal education, I'm also curious to know if there's any teacher that made like a lasting impression on you, that influenced you.
Yeah. So, well, I think I had a teacher, a geography teacher back in high school, and she, like, back then, mind maps were not something that like people talk about like we do nowadays. It was kind of this kind of esoteric concept, and I don't think that even had a name, like, or not in my context. I didn't know what a mind map was. And there was my teacher trying to, like, geography teacher, trying to explain to us like geopolitics, like it was Asian geopolitics or something like that. And her exam was super tough, and but she taught in a way that helped me make the connections in my mind. And after her classes, I went back home and tried to like draw the connections that she was trying to explain in a mind map. So I was kind of intuitively trying to visualize the connections through mind maps. So she was not the one who introduced me formally to the concept of mind maps. But the way she explained, the way she addressed those topics was, I don't know, it was conducive to thinking graphically and visually.
Yeah, that's really interesting how basically you describe how she gave you like a mental tool, right? That you can then like use and apply in different settings.
Yeah. So that kind of she I think she helped me identify structures and relationships between different actors, and I was kind of trying to find a way to convey that in a form that was not text, because text was like too hard for me at that point. uh so I and of course I had to do that for the test, and I think I did it well. But like the starting point with the visualization of the concepts, I think, was key.
I love that, because in education we always talk about transferring knowledge, and here's like it goes like way beyond what she was teaching in geography. It's she told you something that you can practice like across disciplines.
Yeah, I think what you said about the thing that you said about mental models and perhaps a mental tool to address any other topic, definitely.
I love it. I want to move a little like fast forward and kind of understand what brought you to the United States and to Stanford to do a master after having a range of like professional experiences before that.
Right. Yeah, so I think it goes back to identity too. I think when I was um, um, before pursuing my master's in Stanford, I was working with educators for a couple of years back then, but I didn't feel super confident in working with that field, like with that like those professionals that did that like every day in their lives for many years, decades. I felt I needed some sort of credential to identify as an educator, as someone who works in education. So I started to think, well, where can I get a something that tells people, well, this guy is an educator.
Very interesting, that question of identity
and being around people, being in a community of other learners, learning together. So I think that was critical for me.
Yeah, that totally resonates with me, because that's also one of the big reasons that I joined this master.
And I think, and then I think I went to the right place. I think that there I met wonderful people like you, and also other many other colleagues and people whom I talk to until now, like professors. So I think I kind of found my community in a way.
Got it. That's nice. And once you finish that master, you had a choice to either like go back, to
right,
or pursue a PhD. What motivated you to?
Yes, when I got there and I saw like researchers, the labs working, like people, professors developing interesting theories about how we learn, I thought, well, maybe I can do that too. I think I'm already here, so there's no point in saying that I cannot do something like that. And there was this specific professor, Roy P, who was like super influential in my in my decision to pursue research as a career. And when I took his class, it was nothing to do with schools. Well, not directly, but it was about sociocultural practices of blues communities. So how blues musicians become blues musicians, and it's a very interesting analogy to learning practices that are inducive to effective learning, basically.
That's awesome. So the analogy between learning and blues musicians and how they get into blues.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, this is fascinating. a lot of useful metaphors and analogies that we can transfer to contexts of formal learning.
Beautiful. And I think that's a great segue into talking about one of the main topics that I want to dive in today, which actually has a lot to do with cultural nuances, right? Because it's like what you've been working on is identifying the differences in how makerspaces are approached in different countries and different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I said you received the Best Student Paper Award this year from the Learning Sciences SIG. And just to give like the topic of that paper, it was about exploring how repurposing materials in local makerspaces is associated with emancipatory practices. Right? Can you tell us a little more about this research?
Yeah, sure. So, just for a little bit of background, I think it's maker education became in the past 15 years well researched and explored topics in education, in the learning sciences and in educational research more broadly. But much of the practices remain connected to a view of making, which is very U.S. centric, and it has a lot to do with the ethos of the Silicon Valley. Making something that either you can commercialize or it can be or just for hobby. And it's connected to things like 3D printers or laser cutters, which are not accessible to many segments of the population worldwide. You have communities that don't have, they will never have money to buy 3D printers or to work with sophisticated tools like those. However, on the other hand, they have many cultural practices that are super valuable. They are relevant. They are meaningful. They are things. Well, they are phenomena that happen for generations, and they can be inducive to learning. So you're kind of adding the cultural relevance of those socio-cultural practices with learning. And this is something that happens in every community. Every community has their century-old practices, their expressions, and everything. And what we're proposing with this line of research is looking at those communities and see how making happens, how maker education might happen in a way that is different from the mainstream view of maker education that is connected to that Silicon Valley ethos of making. And for that specific projects, we partnered with educators in India and Kenya, and we discussed with them how practices of repurposing materials were employed in making activities in their communities. So how do they repurpose products to in educational activities that are, of course, that have the goal of learning, some learning goal. And we found in these communities, especially the one in India, that making with found materials found in their communities, in that case, for example, old bicycles or old bicycles, I think it's a good example. How those practices of repurposing materials were connected to emancipation, or to learners being able to imagine different futures from those that are imposed to them by broader social political structures. So and to translate that to like more simple words, many kids in those communities were using, for example, bicycle wheels to create products that were allowing them to do something like devoting more time to study, or to even to go to school. because in the example that we report in that paper, um, there was a washing machine that was powered by pedals, pedaling, and that was different than that was more effective than washing clothes by hand, and that allowed girls to go to school instead of putting time in household chores, basically. So that was life changing for many of those kids, and some of those girls, some of those kids were the first to attend college in the village. Some of those kids who went to those maker spaces, like these local maker spaces. So it's pretty life changing. It's something. It's a way of making that is completely different than the idea that we have of maker education. But still, they make such a difference in the lives of students.
Yeah,
And I think it's I think it's just one thing about this. I think it's important too. It's not it's critical not to romanticize like poor conditions too. I think it's important, but just to acknowledge that there might be practices that we don't value as others, and they are equally important to those communities. I think that's the main point.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's super important to state it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, just to kind of picture it, like if you go to this, let's say the makerspace in India that you mentioned, if you walk into this makerspace, like what does it look like?
Yeah, so I think there's they have some tools like they do in every place, but I think they have the role of facilitators. So not the hardware, but the software, like the minds. I think there are important component in those spaces. So how the facilitators guide students through activities that are uh, criticize societal structures. I think that's the main point. So it's not just a matter of entering the makerspace and start using some tools, but the what those tools can do for students' emancipation. I think that's the most important thing in those spaces.
I see. And in terms of differences, for example, between the makerspace that you studied in India and the one in Kenya, what were the differences between these two?
Yeah, so the one in Kenya, I think the what's fascinating about that space is that they repurpose materials that were sent for them to take part in robotics Olympics. So there's international competitions of robots. So they built the robots in 1 year, but they had a lot of spare parts. So they use those parts to build something like some things like a prototype for an electrical bike or water filtering system. So they in their case there was this very interesting, very intense reappropriation of materials, technological, like somehow high tech materials, to do some things that were important for the community. They were building something that have had value to the community. So I think this thing of kind of subversion of materials, that was super interesting in their case. So how they subverted the logic of robotics competition to create stuff that were more useful at that point.
I love that. Like I feel it's like so there's that idea of the purpose and there's this idea of working like collaboratively as a group and repurposing.
Yes.
It's interesting because it makes me think of the 4 P's of creative learning by Imi Tresnik. So if you might be familiar with, so there's the 4 P for creative learning. The 4 pillars are peers, play, project, and passion. And you can see here, like
Right.
working along peers, they have their project.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
Mm-hmm.
passion which can like is that purpose of making something for the community, and then there's that element of
Mm-hmm.
play that's always there when you make
Mm-hmm.
things. So it's interesting
Mm-hmm.
to see
Mm-hmm.
how that folds back together.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. I think these are totally connected.
And I'm curious, are the maker spaces affiliated with schools, or are they standalones in the
Mm.
community? How does that work?
Yeah, so some of those maker spaces, not only those in Kenya and India, but we have a network of maker educators at the lab, and most of them are out of school. So they are community centers, they are or independent organizations who which put them together. But I think all of them, like in those examples, I think they support the community. I think they are not attached to a specific institution or something, but they are an important piece of the community of the life, uh, the cultural, social, political lives of those communities.
Mm.
But they're not necessarily connected to schools.
It's very interesting. I'm curious, like how they, they are managed, like who decided to build that makerspace, because there needs to be a certain form of organization, right, to like gather the tools, ensure like safety, those kind of elements.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's always, well, there are different types of maker spaces. There are more decentralized. Some of them are closer to hacking culture. So with that, they bring more a more sometimes a more anarchic view of making. But of course, making now is somehow mainstream. So there's lots of investment by government, by local organizations, foundations, and all that. So there's, of course, there is implementing a makerspace is not an easy and cheap task. It's something that requires money, resources, and everything. Um, but on the other hand, there's lots of interest, and it's seen now as an activity that prepares students for work, for example, not only manual work but also like skills like socialization or working. Well, you mentioned those things like working in projects with peers. All these are kind of part of the world of work nowadays. So it's that's why there's lots of interest for what's possible in maker spaces.
I love that. And it's interesting because it makes me think of what you shared about your own youth, where you had that element of seeing your parents of
Yeah.
like the community around you, like making things, and it was kind of inspiring, and also participating, right, at whatever level it is. And at the same time, also that element of playing with your friends out of school. And so I feel like this is kind of all interconnected, and that natural curiosity and willingness to play and make things.
Yeah, this is a very good point. I think the especially when you think of certain strands of making that value, for example, sewing machines. Like we have a sewing machine here at the lab, at the makerspace here in the lab. So things that are not considered making, but are part of culture of many groups, many social groups. So I think
Yeah.
that's a very very interesting point.
Yeah, swimming is 100% making to me.
Yeah, it is, yeah. It's many groups and researchers acknowledge that. It's interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to now move towards the second big topic that you work on and do research on. I mean, I could talk about
Mm-hmm.
makerspaces and maker education for hours, but
Yeah,
the other topic
yeah.
is just as interesting. And it's just interesting because you mentioned citizenship and preparing people for political, societal presence, and I feel this second topic touch upon that a lot because it's about online disinformation or disinformation in general. You'll tell me more about that and how you can alleviate the issues of disinformation. And so I'd love to hear more about what is your angle on that topic.
So yeah, I think the this second research topic that I have uh, is actually not so much disconnected from the civic participation and emancipation that we try to address with maker spaces and the study of maker spaces, but it's related to communication, online communication, and radicalization, extremism online, and all this. And we're developing a, a tool, a prototype, and it's a tool that uses large language models to identify rhetorical and language traits of disinformation in texts online. So it's basically it shows the learner where in the text the author is employing, for example, undue correlation that's sold as causation, or if there is the use of too many slogans in a communication, or if drives hate and all that. And I think the central point here that we're trying to understand with those with that prototype is the cognitive processes when people face disinformation, because we understand that it's not that people have an empty head and then they see fake news and all the fake news invade their head, their empty brains, and influence them. Those people, we understand that there are learning processes involved in how people are exposed to disinformation, and those cognitive processes are easy to be downplayed by prejudice that we might have against certain groups. For example, it's easy to say just that well, some people are simply dumb, or some people don't get it. It's easy to take that stance. But I think as educators, as learning scientists, I think we have a role to understand what's going on, what are the underlying processes happening when people consume and redistribute this information. So we're working with several different um, studies to understand what those processes are, what those cognitive processes are. So we have that little prototype that is the starting point for a learning sequence in which the learner interacts with a conversational agent, and the conversational agent points to the learner where in the text they can find um, uh, disinformation techniques. So this is one. We have other other design based research initiatives that are, for example, working with computational modeling to um, to visualize the interrelationship between the individual and societal levels of this information. So there are a couple of different projects that we developed to understand further about the cognitive processes and also social cultural processes involved in this information. It's of course it's a topic that is critical nowadays, and it's um, essentially transdisciplinary. So there is communication, there is politics, there is economics, there is many different lenses to that, and we are trying to view that or to tackle that topic through the lens of the learning sciences, how people learn when they consume and distribute this information.
That is so important. Such a
Yeah.
crucial topic that's just gonna get
Yeah.
more and more important. I feel as we go and as technology develops. Like I had a chance to try your early prototype, which was so interesting, and I love the approach of having the learner engage and reflect with their own thoughts and type in, right, like what do you think happened here, and I feel that's very important to have that form of action.
Yeah, so it's important to this is like there's evidence of the importance of engaging learners actively, not only watching passively to an explanation or to something. So we try to include those moments of self-reflection, of writing, doing something active, to discussion, to those are important supports for learning. Those are things that are inducive to learning.
And I'm curious in terms because that's kind of part of improving digital literacy as a whole. I'm wondering from your point of view, like disinformation is one aspect. Like, what do you think as educators or researchers? Where do you think we should prioritize our efforts?
Interesting. So there is I and some other people close to this work understand that you don't. It's not enough to feed people more facts to fight disinformation. This is so we have to find different ways to address that. It's kind of intuitive to think of media literacy or digital more media literacy as just present people the facts, and then they will know that some things are right and some things are wrong. But this is there are a couple of challenges in that approach, and one of them is well, first, it's very hard to even identify a reliable website nowadays. Like it's like even if you have like that small stamp in your browser, that's not something super hard to go around. But second, like going to the learning research, there's evidence that when people form misconceptions or intuitive knowledge, it's not enough to show them more information and then naturally they will learn. It's you need to guide. You can use those misconceptions or these intuitive pieces of knowledge to guide discovery. So this is what we're trying to work with here. So there is research in the natural sciences pointing to that. For example, students go to physics classes with lots of intuitive understanding of how the physical world works. For example, if you there's this intuitive knowledge that says that if you push something harder, that thing will move faster. Mm-hmm. But that's not the case for everything. So this is a little misconception. And what research says about misconceptions in or intuitive knowledge in physics, for example, that it doesn't work. Like you cannot just simply dump lots of facts like in physics and then students will change their mind like magic. So you have to kind of identify where are the weak spots in those micro theories that will change that will make the learner develop conceptual understanding that's more robust. So we're trying to see if there are connections between those that evidence that we see in the natural sciences, for example, to the work with disinformation. So what are these weak spots that we can address?
Super interesting, yeah. And kind of it's funny because again, like bridge back to making and observing like that other way of like when you interact with things, that's also how you learn. It's kind of like link back to that as well, experiential learning.
Yeah, the challenge here is that in physics, for example, you can observe concretely what's happening. So you can create experiments in the lab or something. Then you gradually help the learner develop academic understanding or understanding that's compliant with real science. And with misinformation or many like political, like for example with extremism, it's not something that you can show with a lab experiment how things will end up if people start to comply with extremism. So it's a pretty challenging, and we're kind of debating how to transfer those evidence from the natural sciences to the social sciences, if that's possible at all.
It's definitely a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
I have one last question. If
Okay.
you could design a school around one thing, what would it be and why?
What, around one thing, like a physical thing, or
I don't know. You can interpret. It can be like a
anything?
Subject. Or it can be like a physical space. It can be anything.
Okay, so I think I would design a school around collaboration. I think around so around people collaborating, like doing things together, understanding things together, making things together with their hands, writing together, playing together, making multimedia projects together. I think that's perhaps collaboration is the thing that I would use to design an ideal school.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much, Renato. It was a fantastic conversation. If people want to learn more about you, where should they go about you and your research?
I share some ideas, some work on Twitter, so you can share that and put the handle in the description or whatever. Write an email. I think email always works with me, and I can people can feel free to reach out via email or LinkedIn. I think these are the most easiest ways to reach out.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Renato.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today, and look forward to hearing more about the podcast and everyone who's interested.